Welcome to our podcast. This is the fourth of a four-part series exploring how current events being implemented today will have huge implications for the future of nations. Discovering destructive human wrongs masqueraded as human rights, and how international organizations and Western countries are now using promised foreign aid funding as a tool for advancing many destructive social reforms. This episode will also explore new cultural imperialism that is being advanced in the world today. So buckle up. You are in for a wild ride. I had just arrived at the Mexico City International Airport to attend the World Congress on Families as an invited speaker. At the airport, I saw Sharon Slater, president of Family Watch International, a highly esteemed expert on international policy. As we were walking down the long corridor to claim our bags, Sharon informed me that she had recently received a phone call from Rodrigo Cortez requesting that she attend a parliament-scheduled forum.
We must give the good fight, because if you break the family, if you hurt the family, you are hurting the nations, the future, the humanity.
And lo and behold, this had been planned in advance, but we didn't know that that very day they had proposed legislation to change the Mexican Constitution on the very issues that I was going to be presenting on. They were going to try to force comprehensive sexuality education as a mandatory, statute in the Constitution of the country of Mexico for starting at preschool.
Their parliament had received a bundle of approximately 51 bills. 13 of the parliamentary bills included all of their foreign aid funding, something that they really need. The remaining bills included the advancement of new cultural reforming ideologies.
And then also to put a provision in there on sexual and reproductive health and rights. Sexual and reproductive health and rights, comprehensive sexuality education, those two things are the number one things we fight day in and day out. They're very deceptive. Under those brings the radical agenda to destroy religious freedom, parental rights,
which would have huge implications, tearing down the walls of legal defenses for the protection of the innocence of children, parental rights, life issues, marriage, faith, and family.
And I'm very worried to see that so many decision makers that don't know what are the consequences of some of their decisions. It's very important to try to stop this, I could say, war on family, war on children, because that is what it is. If you see the face of the members of the Mexican Congress sitting there, realizing what really means some terms like a comprehensive sexual education or others, they were like, wow, and will you show the evidence where this concept comes, what are the consequences for children, for families, for innocents? It was wonderful, because since then we have that some of these members of the Mexican Congress were different. By that time they appreciate these life and family issues, but with this knowledge and understanding what is the level of the threat against your country. Wow.
Thank you, Rodrigo, for your willingness to share your insights on how these many cultural social reforming bills are now being bundled with your traditional foreign aid funding bills with mandatory conditions that Mexico's parliament would have to accept the whole bundle or receive nothing.
There's millions, if not billions of dollars at stake for all countries, not just Mexico. They can lose their aid money, any kind of, even trade deals with different countries. The donor countries can boycott them.
As you have pointed out, it's not just the Mexican foreign aid that is being threatened to be withheld. The African, Caribbean, and the Pacific states, which includes some 79 countries, are also being leveraged with the destructive language that has been incorporated by the ACP and EU treaty agreement. Peter Sprigg, can you give us some insights as to what is happening here?
The new agreement is very different from the original one and really strays a long way from the focus on trade and development and into a focus on some of these social issues, including these issues involving so-called sexual and reproductive health and rights, comprehensive sexuality education, and so forth.
Honorable Sonway, as a member of the parliament for the country of Malawi, what can you tell us about what is contained in these so-called trade agreements?
One of the criteria would be whether a country has complied with the newer provisions to do with the sexual reproductive health and rights, to do with comprehensive sexuality education, to do with abortion. So that's where it's going to be becoming more problematic. What will be happening is whenever they're going to support any program, whether to do with education, to do with agriculture, to do with science and technology, you have to comply with the provisions. So all these provisions, they are advancing the issues to do with the SRH, the issues to do with the abortion, the issues to do with the CSEs.
As a member of the Parliament of Uganda, what insights can you give us?
The sole purpose of this was, the background was for trade, really. Do business. Come together to do business. They now want to introduce this LGBTQ agenda into as one of the conditions for this, ACPA agreement. And we're saying, wait, was this part of the deal? I mean, was it the sole reason why this was created? No. Why are you introducing it now? Why are you making it a condition?
And Kyoko, you have been at the very forefront in the defense of the family in Kenya with Citizen Go. And what can you tell us about the ACP-EU agreement from your perspective?
I've seen the content, which is really very, very bad. As a group of people in Europe trying to impose conditions on us in Africa, giving us something good with ties. The way it is being marketed to our parliamentarians, you'd think that it's a very good thing, but we have tried to meet a number of parliamentarians, policymakers, decision makers in our ministries to inform them what is really in this treaty. The main thing is sexual reproductive health rights, and when you interpret that, you will see definitely abortion, you'll see definitely contraception for children, and of course sexualization.
Dr. Shirley Magazi, as the executive chairperson of the Christian Coalition of Churches in Namibia, what implications will this have for the family-friendly countries of Africa?
We're noticing more and more there's penetration to really take away our values, and that is being seen in the process of laws that are being made, policies that are being made, trying to change who we are. That's really what this fight is about. It is about us having to adopt and I'll call the Western world, having to adopt what the Western world has, their ideas and their ideologies, and then taking that and imposing it on African countries. And this is where we need to realize that this is the new colonialism. It's no longer about that which was taking place in the past. They're playing with our minds. They're playing with our values, making us want to look like them. And this is where we're telling our people is, let's preserve who we are. We are different, and we still have so much ahead of us that if we have to look at what's happening in other developed countries, they've lost who they are.
Sharon, you have been a speaker at many international forums on the terms and language that is being used in international documents. Are there deceptive terms that are being used that will erode family cultures?
Comprehensive sexuality education is designed to change the gender and sexual norms of a society. You have countries in Africa where they won't advance LGBT rights. They're very, very, conservative. They want to protect the institution of the family as a man and a woman. They want to protect children. They want them to be abstinent. So they figured a way to get around that is to get to the children. And if you can get them comprehensive sexuality education, tell the governments it's all these wonderful things, but really use it to change the worldviews of the children, then you can raise up the next generation in that society to promote and understand and be involved. And if you can sexualize them in the process, they're going to be stuck into that whole agenda, right? So that's exactly what they're doing. And they're having great success in countries across the world. And what they do is they say, we're going to teach your children about how to stand for your values. So they get the children in and they say, okay, where do your values come from? Well, they're your parents, your religion. And then they'll tell them things like, well, but some parents think masturbation is good for their children. Others think it isn't. Some people think it's okay for children to have sex. Some religions, are okay with that. Some aren't. What they do is they teach I call it sexual relativism. Then they say, well, you know what? You don't have to have the same values as your parents. You can separate. You have your own values that you need to stand by. And by the way, there's international values that everybody agrees to. They're called human rights. And as part of human rights, you have sexual and reproductive health and rights. And part of those, there's sexual rights. And if you want to realize your sexual rights, you've got to have sexual knowledge. I mean, how can you realize these rights if you don't have sexual knowledge on all these things? Then they bring in that radical comprehensive sexuality education.
This is, for us in Africa, we are looking at this as the highest form or the worst form of colonialism. It's back, but worse. It's back, but worse. They're not just taking away everything from you, they're even going up to your brain and trying to wash whatsoever is in that brain, completely take it away from you. You begin now to reason like them or even worse than them. So they want to wash whatsoever is here in your brain, what they are calling bad culture, what they are calling archaic culture, looking at whatsoever Africa stands for in terms of their values as backward, demeaning, useless. So wash that away, take it away from them so that they stop reasoning for themselves. They begin to reason like you or even worse than you.
And now they're coming after us to lose who we are, and they're targeting our youth. So what you're seeing more and more, it is a fight on our values. It is a fight on our identity. It is a fight on ideology, and us having to adapt the ideologies of the Western world. And they use this in the form of providing aid to us. And so what happens is that they'll come and say, we have this funding available to you on 1, 2, 3 conditions that you need to meet. And so in that way, unfortunately, because Africa needs the aid, what happens is that we accept the aid, and we don't really pay much attention to the conditions. Once we have received the aid, that's when they come back and say, but you're supposed to meet, you've agreed to A, B, C, and D. Where is that? And because we already have the aid, what happens is we don't really think much of it. We go ahead and we implement what they want us to implement at the cost of our youth, at the cost of our values as Africans. And somebody has to stand up and fight for it and allow the people to see, give them the information, open their eyes to this, that look, there is a fight on our morality. We need to preserve our moral values. And if we don't do that, before we know it and we wake up, it will be too late, because we would have lost our children, we would have lost our families, we would have lost our youth. And who is to be blamed?
You know, I met just the other evening with a delegation from the CARICOM countries, which are 15 countries from the Caribbean, and also have spoken with several African delegations. And what we are finding is that the International Planned Parenthood Foundation seems to be working in conjunction with the U.S. government and the United Nations to push forward anti-family, pro-abortion positions, and they're using economic aid and the threat of sanctions to extort these sovereign nations to change their own constitutions and cultures simply to adopt what the United States is now exporting, which seems to just be an abortion.
That was our friend, Ralph Trium Sr., whom we met at the World Congress on Families being held in Salt Lake City, Utah in 2015.
There's absolutely going to be no good at all that comes of this, because we have already seen the influence of the United States on the global stage decline precipitously. And in part it's declining because we are going into these nations and being imperialist and in trying to impose on them values which are anathema to their culture and constitution.
What we've realized is that the battle is really on the moral decay in countries like Namibia. And this has come a lot from the push from the Western world. I call it the new colonialism, where so much pressure is being put for us to let go of our moral values. And so most of what is happening is really an attack on that, on the morality and ethical principles of Namibia. We've got to take back our values. We've got to take back what we believe in. We've got to protect our culture. Because who said our culture is wrong? We don't always have to accept what the Western world has to tell us. We need to preserve who we are. We've got something to give to the world. And if we don't preserve who we are, we will be like the rest of everyone.
The impact of these social programs is you now have generations of families without men. You have families where there has not been a father figure in the home raising the children for 3 or 4 generations. And when you lack that authority figure, that figure that provides stability, now you have generations of children who have been raised with no respect for authority, and those children are now acting out, and we see it daily on our streets, in our public schools, where there is just a complete lack of respect for authority and a breakdown of culture and society.
We are also joined today by Dr. Antonios from Ethiopia. Doctor, is there language incorporated in this proposed ACP treaty agreement that may be considered a violation of the sovereignty of nations?
Our national parliaments don't even know the content of the agreement. Our lawmakers are asking the EU to give us the draft document, the final draft document, but EU is not willing to give us. So they're just going to go ahead and get it signed in May or June of this year, 2023. In fact, they're planning to have it signed as soon as possible without the ratification by our national parliaments. This is a serious sovereignty issue. I mean, how come a nation get into an agreement of a 20-year agreement without Parliament knowing what the content of that agreement is? I mean, this is unconscionable.
At the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was put into place to protect the cultural integrity and sovereignty of nations for the protection of world peace.
The reason why Universal Declaration, it was to protect these cultures, not to destroy, not to find definitions that suits us. No, it was to protect what is there. We have a whole UN body that is in charge of preservation of cultures. What an irony. A whole body that is in charge of preserving, they call this is what? A cultural heritage. So if that is it, so why want to destroy what you stand for? So what is now the meaning of this body if it can't do what it's supposed to do?
The content of that agreement being very destructive to the cultural, religious, and social values of that nation. And this is the kind of play that is going on. In fact, when you go into the document, like I said earlier, you don't see these things, clearly. You don't see gay rights, you don't see abortion, but they are there in wordings that are not clear to our lawmakers. It's a wordplay. For example, they use the terms like sexual and reproductive health and rights. When you look this word, SRHR, the acronym, sexual and reproductive health and rights, it looks benign. It looks as if it is having no serious impact. But when you look into it, when you look into the definition given by the European Union for the word sexual health, for the word reproductive health, you will be appalled.
Ambassador Dahab, as a representative of the country of Sudan for over 30 years to the United Nations, to Russia, Malaysia, and former Yugoslavia, Ambassador, with that wealth of experience, what can we learn?
This agreement is trying, as far as I know, to impose the social and cultural convictions of the vast majority of European countries and European Union, to impose them by the very clauses of this agreement on these nations in Africa, Pacific, and Caribbean. And I would like to mention particularly some articles, like Article 36.2 of the agreement itself, and also Article 100 on resolution of disputes between the parties to this agreement, which lean to some sort of imposition of these values on the nations of these regions. Generally speaking, the people I'm talking about, the people of these regions, most probably are not in favor of relinquishing their values.
Traditionally, as you know, Africa is built on values, traditional values, religious values, and these values, they are the bedrock of the family, traditionally. Now, with the new agreement coming from the EU, all these dictates, basically what it does, these agreements are attacking the fabric of the family. It's an onslaught on the values of the family, of the African family, which is challenging the sovereignty of the African continent.
We are urging them to consider these differences and to try to accommodate these differences and to get into meaningful negotiations to come at a point where we will preserve the sovereignty and the will of the peoples of these regions, and not to tell them what values they should adopt.
Sarah Opendi of the Parliament of Uganda, can you share insights with us as to what is at stake?
What I want to say is that really the future of our nations depends on the family units. Once we promote the family units, strong families, then nations will prosper. We cannot break that.
The family is so important because it forms what society is. If you have so many families that are dysfunctional, that whole community is affected. So a family is so, so important to us.
Will this new cultural imperialism transform their traditional family values, which has been foundational for their country's continued growth and economic survival? Is the prosperity of a nation found in the need to strengthen and fortify the most fundamental and foundational group unit of society, the family? And is the family worthy of protection by the state? This was the 4th episode of our 4-part series on how human wrongs are being advanced as human rights, and how our actual human rights are being trampled. We hope that you will help spread the word. Thank you.